This is the Applied Skills video for Module 10, focusing on understanding priorities of process and levels of service. As discussed in the Applied Skills video for Module 9, Assignment 2 focuses on the long-term trajectory consequences as a type of analysis, which covers the entire project process continuum as a way of emphasizing the chains of cause and effect that can be used to describe and support your professional judgment when it comes to answering, is or was this action reasonable in regards to the response to any given situation or issue that arises on a project. Assignment 2 is set early in the project process and emphasizes possible outcomes in regards to the type of long-term trajectory consequence analysis. This way of analysis prioritizes looking into the current situation and into the future, projecting how the project could develop. Now in Module 2, we shift our focus to looking at the project in retrospect, considering the past as a type of analysis. This is more often set later in the project process as a sort of lessons learned exercise. This process of identifying the priorities of process within a project will begin our preparation for assignment number 3. When we get to assignment 3, we'll look at developing fee proposals. Our mindset for this is before the next project and will be based on priorities of process and levels of service distinction covered as the applied skills in your discussion for this module. The priorities of process and levels of service will outline what you need going into the next project to successfully manage both the project and the office environment to support it, and do so at a profit. First, in covering priorities of process, in your initial posting this week, you'll be developing a short sketch of the idealized project process. This is a skill that is useful in real-world situations to describe to clients how you'll manage their proposed project to keep it on track and within the bounds of the standard of care. This includes looking at all the potential services that might be needed to be completed throughout the project and at each project phase, and deciding together as a project team which are the most significant and deserve special attention to maintain the desired best possible outcome for the project. In doing this, you will develop process recommendations that demonstrate that you can focus on the essential goal items that must be achieved at each stage of the project, or the priorities of process. Much of what is prioritized is mandated by the information development needs of the project process, or is required as one of the many process supports for the standard of care. In this sense, these items would not be considered optional or discretionary as a part of the process. They're critical and core to the process, and without them, you're not fulfilling project requirements. However, running parallel to this, you must also articulate your understanding of where your personal implementation of the threshold for the standard of care lies, based on your personal priorities and architecture. So therefore, you must also focus on how you define the range or spectrum of your firm's services and actions that span from a preferable or the best approach to a just defensible, just meeting the standard of care, to an unacceptable approach. Seeing professional services as a range with a threshold reinforces that along with the mandatory components, there are also optional or discretionary components of or extents to which the services that the architect provides for a project based on time, availability, fee availability, client desires, etc. One of the project manager's most important task is to keep the professional service variables in balance with the construction project variables. This involves describing to the client the different levels of professional service for the project that are commensurate with the different levels of compensation that they might pay. From this perspective, the project manager helps the client understand and agree to pay for what is needed and wanted, and conversely, make sure that the client is not being asked to pay for what is not needed or not wanted on the project. It can be difficult to explain to the client that you may have to reduce the level of quality of your service based on the fee that the client is willing to pay. Rather, you might say that there are many levels of service above a baseline, that baseline being the standard of care, as appropriate to the building types and the project budget and fees, and then describe the added value of each of those increased levels of service, as well as describing the project process and standard of care reason behind that minimum threshold. The success of a firm can heavily depend on successfully making and communicating the distinction between these various levels of service. So again, within any given task that is required as a part of the project process that you need to do in order to get to the end of a project, there's tiers to which the level of service you might implement it at. And those tiers we've defined here as being the preferable level, or how you would love to do that piece of work in an idealized process, a just acceptable level that meets the standard of care and meets the project requirements, but doesn't necessarily go as far as it could, and the unacceptable level, which wouldn't fulfill the requirements of the project and wouldn't necessarily meet the standard of care. And there's other options within those ranges as well, but these are sort of the three distinctions that we're making about the levels of service you might convey to a client, and depending on the fee that they're willing to pay for that part of the work on the project.